Hello everyone, welcome back to the Gates of Huldah. Today's session is titled The Untold History Between Blacks and Native Americans. It's an American secret that you must know. So this is part 2 of the session that I did about the mass suicide of the Igbos who were brought to Igbo Landing in St. Simon's Island, Georgia. You want to keep this information, take notes, and if you have children or grandchildren, share this with them. And of course, share it with other friends and family members because we need to get the word out about our history. We have been told things about who we are, and it has not been true. As I shared with you in the first video called Negro Find Out Who You Really Are, you heard from a professor who told you that the textbooks are not accurate and that they are not even reviewed. So lies are being told year after year. In about the 3rd grade, children are being indoctrinated with this lie. So I encourage you to get this information, and then you get the history book and you go through it and show them where things were whitewashed or left out, and show them the outright lies as well, because you owe it to them to give them the truth about their history. And this was really an eye-opening experience. As for me, it just, warmed my heart as I researched this information to really study this Gullah Geechee culture, because I can remember growing up feeling so ashamed when you're called a Geechee, and really that term I didn't become familiar with that term until I left home. But for those who grew up along this corridor here, and what I'm talking about is this area between Wilmington, North Carolina, and Jacksonville, Florida. This is called the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. And I can remember hearing the word, "Oh, you're a Geechee," because of the way I talked. And it just sounded so degrading. And I really didn't know what it meant. So it was really good for me to come into the understanding of what it means, because we really have a rich culture. And as I mentioned before, we have to share this information with our children. There's so much more to our story that was intentionally left out of the history books. And we need to know this. We were fed lies to make us believe that we were less than human, just ignorant savages who should be thankful that we were brought here as slaves because America allowed us to become civilized. So we need to continue to uncover this. After our trip to St. Simon's, this is when I dug a little deeper to learn more about this area. And I must say that I was pleasantly surprised just finding out more about this area down in here in Brunswick and Igbo Landing. So yeah, I'm going to share a lot of information with you today. So definitely you don't want to miss this today. So let's dig in. This is an oil painting of the ship that they smuggled the Igbos in on, called the Wanderer. This is an oil painting of the ship from 1931 that was painted by Warren Shepherd. And the ship docked on Jekyll Island. Here is a picture of 3 of the survivors from the ship, and the look on their faces says it all. Can you imagine what they were feeling during that time? Let's start with a truth that has been whitewashed from the history books, and that is that Africans were already here before Christopher Columbus got here. And even Columbus confirms this. Let's take a look at this article. The title is Before Columbus, How Africans Brought Civilization to America. And this was printed in the Global Research. So let's start with this first paragraph. It says, the strongest evidence of African presence in America before Columbus comes from the pen of Columbus himself. In 1920, a renowned American historian and linguist, Leo Wiener of Harvard University, in his book, Africa and the Discovery of America, explained how Columbus noted in his journal that Native Americans had confirmed that black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats trading in gold-tipped spears. Now imagine that. Because historians want us to believe that Africans were just wild savages and ignorant. There's no way that they could have accomplished anything great. So this is proving the opposite. I'll keep reading. It says, one of the first documented instances of Africans sailing and settling in the Americas were black Egyptians led by King Ramses III during the 19th dynasty in 1292 BC. So just think about it. How did those Olmec statues get here? How did they get here? In fact, in 445 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs' great seafaring and navigational skills. Further concrete evidence noted by Dr. Imhotep and largely ignored by Eurocentric archaeologists includes Egyptian artifacts found across North America, from the Algonquin writings on the East Coast to the artifacts and Egyptian place names in the Grand Canyon. Now just think about that. We've been fed lies, and it's time to correct that. It really is. All of our people did not come here as slaves, you all. Now, the history books did a good job of whitewashing our history, and they left this information out to include the extensive relationship between the Africans who were already here with the Native Americans and the relationships with the enslaved people and the Native Americans. It wasn't uncommon for the runaway slaves to escape to the areas where the natives lived, and many of them were intermarrying. The black Seminole culture that took shape after 1800, it was a mixture of African, Native American, Spanish, and slaves. So a lot of the practices and customs of the Native Americans were adopted by the enslaved people and vice versa. And when they married, when the descendants of these marriages were called Maroons, and these people are who made up the Seminole tribes. But this article right here comes straight from the Census archives, and you're welcome to look this up. And it's a census from 1830 by Benjamin Merrill, and this census was taken in Carroll County, Georgia. And he shows a total population of 3,419, and it's counting the white males, white females, the male slaves, female slaves, and it lists free colored males and free colored females. So what he says is that it appears that the free colored people counted were mostly Native Americans. This is unusual and provides some rare data about some of our first Americans. They were all listed on the last 2 pages of the records. If you go and pull this article up, it will give their name. So what they were doing was they would go into the areas when they were conducting the census, and they basically listed people based on how they looked. So if your skin was really dark, then you were just colored. So a lot of the Native Americans had their heritage just stripped by someone simply looking at their skin color and saying, "You're colored." Now, if you think about that, it was a deceptive way to steal the land, because they then enslaved some of these people who were listed as color. So you see this picture here. It says the entire Cherokee Indian population of Carroll County, Georgia, was listed as colored persons in 1830. Think about that. You can see here how dark, the skin color of some of the natives were. This is taken, it's entitled An Emblem of America, and this is from London, published in 1801 by Haynes and Son. It was in the British Museum. But you can certainly see that these people were very dark skinned. And there's a very rich culture of the Native Americans and Africans who were already here, and then later the enslaved African. But they adopted many of the practices, wore some of the same types of clothing, ate some of the same food, began to prepare them the same way. The Africans and the enslaved people began to gather the roots of the native plants. There was one called the coontie, and you had to grind it and soak it and strain it to make it into a starchy flour, as well as they taught them about how to mash the corn using a mortar and a pestle to make something called soft-key, that was something like a porridge. It talks about a dried corn that was also cracked, and a wooden mortar was used to make corn flour and cornmeal and grits. And as I was reading this information and learning about this, it's like, that's why we eat so much grits in the South. I mean, that's grits and rice. That's just a staple, in our family. That's the meal, really. You can do so many things with it, but it really explained our love of grits in the South. And I can remember growing up, it wasn't uncommon to hear that we had ancestors who were Indians. It was just a statement of fact. So I found this information to be very, very interesting. Now I want to share some things with you. Don't miss this part. We're going to talk about why was it so easy for the Europeans to go into these other nations and basically wipe out the inhabitants and claim this land as their own. There was a doctrine that was sanctioned by the Catholic Church. As you begin to study this out, you'll see that there's no real separation of church and state. It's an ideal that was never fully implemented, because the ideology of the doctrine is still on the books today. And this doctrine was called the Doctrine of Discovery. And as I mentioned, when my sister shared this with me, I was like, this is it right here. But let me tell you what this doctrine is, and if you'll look it up, you'll find out more information about it. I had never heard about it before, But again, I have a link at the bottom that you can read more about this. But in essence, the Doctrine of Discovery established a spiritual, political, and legal justification for colonization and seizure of land not inhabited by Christians. So let me put quotes around that now. White Christians. It has been invoked since Pope Alexander VI issued the papal bull Inter Caetera in 1493. The papal decree aimed to justify Christian European explorers' claims on land and waterways they allegedly discovered and promote Christian domination and superiority, and has been applied in Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Americas. So that was a question I always had, and some of you may have had it as well. How in the world could Christopher Columbus have discovered America if people were already living here?
I think we always wondered why did they think it was right or just to do what they did was, to take our lands and to push us off our lands and try to eliminate us as a people. And then we discovered this Doctrine of Discovery, and it just kind of made things understandable as to where they got their direction from.
When Columbus landed, and he went back and he reported, and they said then, the leaders, and the Vatican was the most powerful voice in the world at that time. A papal bull, 1493, 1 year later. If there are no Christian nations in this new land you have discovered, I declare those lands to be empty. Terra nullius, very old Roman law that had been exercised in Africa, India, Europe. Further, if there are people there and they are not Christians, they do not have a right of title to land. They have only the right of occupancy. From our perspective, the same right as a rabbit running on the ground, or a turkey, or a deer, or a buffalo, or an Indian. They do not have a right of title to land. 1823, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall adjudicating the case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Two white men arguing over Ohio Indian land. He says, you boys have it all wrong. Don't you understand? This was settled long ago. They don't have a right of title to land. And he moved that principle into U.S. federal law, 1823. The Doctrine of Discovery became the doctrine of law today. Christian doctrine, specific. Wasn't Muslim doctrine, wasn't Jewish doctrine, Christian. And it prevails. It's here, it's a reality, but most people don't understand that, and most people don't know that. We didn't even understand that on 1990, 1991, when I first really said, wow, what's the Doctrine of Discovery? What is that? A young man by Name was Steve Newcomb. Said, I got something. You guys got to see it. Came out of Peru. Came out of people down there that were really digging. It was a unspoken conspiracy by states going on all those years. Shh, don't tell the Indians. We found out anyway. Eventually, finally. 2007, Oneida versus New York. Court case. First notation by a Supreme Court Justice, Doctrine of Discovery. 2007. It's not alive. I think it's alive and well. 30-year court case for Onondaga Nation, dismissed out of hand. Oh, you guys were too slow, it's too late. Let's make up, new latches, we'll call it. Besides, it's disruptive to our people. That's what the justice said. It's disruptive. No discussion about our people and about justice and about what's right. The American people don't know about this. Well, it's time they learn. It's time they learn because it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us. And I would be very, very, very careful about stamping out the last place that's holding the line the hardest. Haudenosaunee Six Nation. That's holding the line the hardest. For the common good. For the good of all. For the future. That's what I have to say.
Under international law, that when a European Christian country was the first European to discover new lands, they had a legal right to that area.
The Doctrine of Discovery defined anybody who is not Christian as less than human and unworthy of land ownership.
The Doctrine of Discovery, as practiced, is evil. It provided that only those who know Christ are to be the chosen people. And it indicated that those who did not know Christ, who were not baptized, were heathens and had no souls and were animals. As a result of that, those heathens and animals could not own, possess, manage, or use their own indigenous lands.
There is no question that religion was a major part of the Doctrine of Discovery and justification from the European viewpoint as to why they were predominant and dominant, and God intended for European Christians to have the whole world. And in the famous or infamous papal bulls in 1452 and in 1455, the Pope orders Portugal to invade, subdue the Saracen, and which was their word for Muslim, and the pagan of any of whatsoever, take their property, take their lives, govern them, rule them, take. The popes created these papal bulls and started this development of the Doctrine of Discovery. But this was not a Catholic Church-specific movement. The idea of acquiring the lands and rights of indigenous peoples was very much just a European idea, and maybe greed, let's say the word outright. Queen Elizabeth I is the best example. She was an excommunicated Catholic. She authorized English expeditions to North America to attempt the first English colonies in North America. She complied with the papal bulls, even though she was no longer Catholic. And so she ordered Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who were the first Englishmen authorized by the Crown to attempt colonies in what's now the United States. And I can quote you the phrase, she told them, "Go where no Christian prince has yet been, and acquire for me sovereignty, jurisdiction, and title."
And so the race was on for European monarchs to discover and claim as much of the New World as possible in the name of Christ.
Terra nullius is also an aspect of the Doctrine of Discovery, and there's two aspects of terra nullius. If land was completely empty and no human lives there, When a European power arrived there, they claimed it.
But that wasn't the case when Columbus landed in what is now San Salvador. We were an estimated, in North and South America, 95 million natives. When the era of extermination by the United States of native peoples ended, we were less than 1 million people. And what happened to all of our ancestors who had a right to live here? Their rights should not have been subjugated by the doctrine of discovery.
But Europeans were pretty intelligent, or should I say sneaky, about interpreting the doctrine of discovery in their own favor. So even if there were human beings where they landed, they still said this land is terra nullius if these people are not using the land in a way European legal systems approve. If they aren't farming, if they aren't using the land to the best and highest use, then that land is terra nullius and is vacant, quote unquote, and available for claim and acquisition by a European power.
The fact that this doctrine has been used to justify these wicked behaviors and to even try to say that this is godly, it should clearly tell you where this came from. We know that Satan is the father of lies. Let's take a look at the scripture. It says, "Remember the days of old. Consider the years long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, and they will inform you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the sons of God." Who gave the people their land, the different nations their land? You see what I'm saying? And even today, this doctrine is in use. It's happening all over. The United States and other nations just go in and rob and pillage and steal other people's resources, go in and steal their oil, and pretend that those nations are not doing things the way they would like them to do it. So they have a right to just go in and take it. The Bible says Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. We'll keep going. So back to my earlier question about why the crew of the Wanderer would risk so much. You know, this would have been a federal offense to smuggle in these Igbos. Why so much effort to traffic in so many enslaved people? Because this nation needed skilled labor. You're not just going to bring in some ignorant fools who don't know what they are doing to build a nation. No, they needed skilled labor, free labor. So the slaves brought over from West Africa by way of the Caribbean brought the knowledge of rice production from their homelands and provided significant labor to transform those swamps into rice and cotton fields. And this article that I'm going to show you here, again, pull this up and read it. It's from the University of South Carolina Scholar Commons. It's going to prove that. I'm going to read some excerpts from this. But when you hear the lie that says, oh, the people brought here were just prisoners of war that the Africans sold to the Europeans. Some of them may have been, but don't believe that that was the sole purpose. It's a lie. Unscrupulous historians created this fantastic lie to make it seem like America rescued the savages who were running around naked, acting like animals. And many of us bought into that lie because we didn't know any better. So now you hear Christian pastors saying, well, it was God's will for Negroes to be brought here as slaves because they taught us how to be Christians. What a lie that was. What a lie that was. So let's take a look at this article, African Architectural Transference to the South Carolina Low Country. And the period here is 1700 to 1800. It starts by saying, Littlefield's comprehensive study demonstrates convincingly that South Carolina planters knew enough about ethnic origins of their slaves to show preference for those who came from Gambia and Senegambia, the rice-growing sections of West Africa. So they were looking for the experienced. That's who they brought to this nation. Let's drop down. It says the ethnic preferences and biases of Carolina planters are reflected by the instructions of such merchants as Henry Lawrence, who in 1756 remarked that few of our planters will touch Calabar. It's talking about the Igbo slaves when others can be had. So in this article, you see that they are talking about certain people that they were looking for. Talk about the Mandingos and what their strengths were, that they were superior in intelligence to the other classes. Talking about the Negroes from the Gold Coast. They knew who they were looking for, you all. But the history books conveniently left this out. These people brought the skills and intelligence about rice planting to this nation, but the white slave owners got credit for this. They had no idea how to plant rice. We'll keep going. Again, I really encourage you to share this information with your children, your grandchildren. Our people need to know our rich heritage that has been stolen. Let's take a look at this article, and this is African Contributions to Science, Technology, and Development. And it's a UNESCO article from the Slave Root Project. This was written by Paul Lovejoy. It says the African contribution to science and technology can be appreciated with respect to the impact on the development of the Americas, which suffered severe population destruction through disease and European conquest after 1492. Spain, Portugal, and then other Western European countries took advantage of military superiority and the demographic catastrophe in the Americas to confiscate vast tracts of land, which only needed labor, free labor, and transferred technology for its development. European empires and the generation of enormous wealth depended upon the combination of these ingredients: virtually free and very fertile land, labor and technology largely from Africa, and the ability to garner huge profits through the reliance on slavery, in which workers were not paid for their labor or their technology. It is crucial to note that none of the major plantation crops in the Americas and only a few of the foodstuffs consumed by people in the Americas came from Western Europe, while virtually all of the newly introduced crops originally came from Africa or were grown there before their introduction to the Americas. We've got to learn our history, the true history. Let's keep reading. Cotton was grown and made into textiles in the western Sudan and in the interior of the Bight of Benin for centuries before being introduced to the Americas, along with weaving, indigo dyeing, and the decorative arts associated with textiles. Rice, indigenous to West Africa, was introduced into the sea islands of South Carolina and Georgia, as well as the Mississippi Valley. You all, we have a very rich history, and it's time for us to learn who we really are as a people. This is another article that you may want to read. It's talking about the effects of forced migration on the Igbos. So I'll just read some snippets from this. It says, an agricultural society would not have been possible without the metal tools to clear trees and plants. And then I'll drop down. It says, in 1959, Thurston Shaw, an English archaeologist, and his team were invited by the Antiquities Department of Nigeria to explore excavation sites. Between 1959 to 1960 and again in 1964, Shaw and his team found numerous pieces of pottery decorated with artistic detail, ivory tusks, forged iron objects, large quantities of bead ornaments, and finally copper and bronze objects, some produced by the lost wax process and adorned with intricate designs. He goes on to say, the bronze and copper objects cause much discussion for their creativity and distinction from the Benin and Ife, I'm hoping I'm saying that one right, the Ife bronzes unearthed west of the Niger. Adding to the interest were the carbon-14 dates acquired, and it suggested that the culture was most likely not later than the 10th century AD. So advanced Iron Age culture, remarkably early in Igbo land development, is cause for reconsidering the previous construction of southern Nigerian history. This is saying that carbon dating is showing that they were doing these things in the 10th century AD. So, yeah, we need to speak truth about who we were as a people, the skills that were brought to this nation, and that is why these people, our people, were brought to this land. Let's keep going. Let's dig a little deeper. Okay, here's another one that you can go and look up. The link is at the bottom, and it's talking about African nation founders, talking about the iron workers who were brought here to this land. And it says African men with iron making skills were imported to the Chesapeake to work as blacksmiths on plantations and in the iron industry that by the early 18th century had begun to develop in colonial America. Iron workers were an elite group in West and West Central Africa. It says in West Africa, the rise of the Edo, Fan, and a series of Yoruba kingdoms between 1400 and 1700 owe their political dominance to heavily equipped armies using a highly developed iron technology. Blacksmiths were attributed central roles in the mythical origins of numerous West Central African and West African peoples. And I'll drop down. It says by 1775, the American colonies were the world's third largest producer of iron. So where did they get that from? Built largely on slave labor. slavery played a crucial role in the growth and development of the industry. So how can you continue to promote this lie that you brought savages, who were just stupid people and ignorant, and basically America came to the rescue? Because of America, we are now civilized. What? Okay, let's keep going. I want to encourage you to leave your comments on this video. I'd really like to know your thoughts about this, and tell me how you're sharing it and what the responses are when you do share this information. I would have loved to have known this. I would have loved for this information to have been in my history books instead of the whitewash history that I was given. But I want to read the scripture from the New Living Translation, taken from Deuteronomy 32:35. I will take revenge. I will pay them back. In due time their feet will slip. Their day of disaster will arrive, and their destiny will overtake them. Hopefully you got something out of this session today. That you learned something, that you see that this is valuable information and worth sharing, particularly that doctrine of discovery. We're going to keep digging a little more into that because there's so much more to share about that. It has really shaped, the foundation of this nation, and we need to really know how that worked and how it has impacted people of color. And you can also see that in no way, shape, or form would that have been consistent with the character of the Creator. There is just no way. That idea did not come from him. But this information was it was personal for me because I grew up on one of these islands. And as I mentioned before, it just sounded so demeaning when people would say, oh, you're a Geechee. And actually, the name Gullah has come to be accepted as the name for blacks in South Carolina, while Geechee refers to the blacks of Georgia. And I didn't know that. But these are the truths that we need to continue to uncover. It's time to know the truth and to tell the truth. And we're calling them out for their lies. So I want you to hit like, then share it. And if you haven't subscribed, do so. Be sure to hit the bell or you won't be subscribed based on YouTube's new policies. And I want you to join me next time at the gates of Huldah as we continue to uncover the truths about our history. Shalom, everyone.